Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to episode 18 of the NTA's TVET webinar series. I'm Curtis Daniel, the Manager HR at the National Training Agency and the moderator for this afternoon's session. Let me take the opportunity to thank all participants for taking the time out to join us today. I want to promise an informative and meaningful session. For the next hour, we will be discussing the topic, eliminating biases in TVET occupation. Today's presenter is Ms. Natalie Jackman Ible, Vice President of the Human Resource Management Association of Trinidad and Tobago, and an eminently qualified and respected professional. To start the backdrop, I will want to share briefly some information from the ILO's website on its guide on making TVET and skills development inclusive for all, first presented in March 2020. And it says this: it gives a few facts and trends of inclusion in TVET, which I believe is a good reference point. It states that TVET and skills development systems strive to fulfill the demands of all people seeking to learn relevant new skills in order to improve their career prospects, income, or professional status. And this is done by equipping individuals with knowledge, skills, and competencies linked to labor market demands. TVET systems are recognized globally as a crucial instrument for increasing employability, better job prospects, and potentially improving social inclusion. However, for a wide range of reasons, many individuals and groups in society find themselves excluded from educational and training opportunities. This discrimination might be based on age, national extraction, race, color, political opinion, disability, sex, gender, ethnicity, or other grounds. The situation can be even more difficult for those experiencing discrimination on multiple and intersecting grounds, such as disability and sex, religion and age, and gender and sexual orientation. Such discrimination, however, in particular when starting early in life, leads to higher probabilities of unemployment, low wages, as well as more precarious types of jobs. One of the biggest challenges, many organizations continue to face is skill shortages. And the ILO in its World Employment and Social Outlook Trend 2022 would have given us some statistics, where it stated that the Latin America and Caribbean region was most severely hit in 2020, with the sharpest decline in GDP from 7.5% and a drop in working hours equivalent to 36 million full-time jobs. Locally, there are many conversations surrounding diversification and the potential impact of TVET opportunities fully capitalized upon. The question, therefore, is, can we afford exclusion of any possible applicant? It is against this backdrop we will be discussing raising the awareness of the existence of potential biases in TVET occupations, its impact, and mechanisms for eliminating such biases. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my immense pleasure at this time to introduce and welcome our presenter, Ms. Natalie Jackman Ible, who is a performance strategist, consultant, and an internationally recognized coach. She has over 20 years experience as an engineer and in facilitating the personal and professional development of industry-oriented professionals, leaders, and SMEs. She founded a Caribbean Association for Coaches and has served with international coaching nonprofits. Join me in welcoming Ms. Jackman Ible. Very informative discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Jackman Ible.
Thank you very much, Mr. Daniel, and thank you everyone for turning up. I'm here representing HERMAT, and as Mr. Daniel would have informed you, I'm the Vice President of HERMAT, and therefore, and just let me say, for clarity, HERMAT is the Human Resource Management Association of Trinidad and Tobago, and therefore we are very, very concerned about all aspects of employment, of people development, and how that impacts employers, employees, individuals, the nation as a whole. So this presentation is dealing with one aspect of the wide range of issues that human resource developers and people professionals deal with, and it's specifically about how biases affect development, individuals, organizations, and what we could do to eliminate them, because there is value in doing that. Okay, so thank you very much for your introduction, Mr. Daniel, and hopefully we'll have enough time at the end to take some questions and really engage in a discussion, because what we want to do here is really raise awareness. We're going to keep the presentation relatively simple because we want to keep the conversation at that level and not make it too technical. All right, it is a complex subject, but 1 hour limits what we could do. So, yes, we could move on now with this slide. Okay, so I like to not make too many assumptions. And so I'm not going to assume that everyone in the audience is fully aware of what TVET is about and what bias is about, right? So just briefly, just to make sure we're all on the same page, we're talking about technical vocational education and training, which is the non-academic technical education and practical training, right? It always or typically focuses on youth, and the objective is to very quickly make youth who have graduated from secondary school employable, so that they could move in very quickly and become integrated into the labor force, right? But of course, those skills that they come with have to be aligned with whatever the national and local context is, what are the needs and demands of sectors, organizations, and so on. Now, just to be clear though, this is a very distinct career path. It is based on non-academics, but it can in fact lead to academic certification as well. And this is something that I guess not many people might be aware of or pay close attention to. It's a starting point with the practical as opposed to the academic. Next slide. All right, so as we said, it focuses on the non-academic. It's hands-on learning, and that learning could be structured in a formal way through institutions that actually have laboratories where you do practical sessions and training sessions and so on, or less formal ways where you learn on the job, all right? Very important to this type of training is ensuring that there's some basic skills in place, and they're usually incorporated. Things such as literacy and numeracy skills, transversal skills such as critical thinking, decision making that apply across all skill sectors. The thing about it is that true to form, we use it as an alternative means of ensuring that youth are employable, that they acquire skills that could give them a means of living, a means of career progression, and it's an alternative to the academic approach where you get into more detailed technical expertise around a particular subject, and these are usually, the academics is usually done in tertiary institutions like universities. There are universities that also have a very similar program to the TVET, and in fact, carry technician level programs as well. And I should mention that the TVET has several levels, from very basic to expert, as I mentioned. And in fact, in European nations, you can actually get a certification as a master in a particular discipline as well. So yes, we could move on from there. Right. I just wanted to say, before speaking about this particular slide, that, you know, it's really important to talk about TVET, because the skills that, the technical vocational skills are so important to the running of a nation, to our existence, to our survival. If we look at the pandemic, for example, we couldn't do without a plumber. If we needed one, what would we do? We could attempt some repairs that may not have lasted very long. The TVEC fraternity kept the lights on, they kept the water going, you know. These are the chefs, the hairdressers, and so on. So this is a really important sector, and in fact, going forward into the future, it's the place that we're going to find the skills necessary for the digitization and all of that new IT related Industry 4 stuff that is going to come and is already coming in the future. Of course, we have different sectors. We have the tourism sector, industry, and so on. I am most familiar with the industrial sector, but it covers a very, very wide range of disciplines. Right, so now we get to the issue at hand, bias. So what is bias? Basically is that tendency, that inclination, that prejudice that we have for one position or the other, especially if it's going to be unfair, or if it's going to discriminate, or if it's going to put somebody at a disadvantage, right? And that happens a lot, as you will see later. There's a lot of room for bias. Right? The problem with bias is that all that good stuff that I just said about the technician, the TVET vocations, leading us into the future, sustaining us, and so on, when we make plans for the future, those plans are limited. The success of those plans, the performance of those plans and initiatives can be severely restricted by the biases that flow through the TVET system. Now, these biases, many of them are not unique to TVET, but they exist and they are faced by everyone, regardless of what stream they fall into, right? So the issue is that biases are an obstacle to achievement. They're an obstacle to performance. And we have biases becoming that obstacle at all levels. The individual. If you experience bias and discrimination, you can be excluded from many things. It could be from a line, it could be from a job. It could, as Mr. Daniel pointed out in his introduction, it could set the stage for your entire career progression. It could set the stage for how much you earn, you know, so it has tremendous impact. With respect to employers, of course, employers try to be very systematic and so on, but employers introduce bias as well. And that very bias prevents them from achieving more, right? So it could prevent them from becoming more innovative, more adaptive, more agile, or simply from earning more or selling more, right? In terms of the economy, all of this blows up on a grand scale, right? The sad thing about bias, though, is that it compounds. This is what makes it a big issue. It's not that, okay, today I might face a little racial discrimination and that's it. It doesn't work that way. It compounds. So if I'm a Black woman in STEM vocations, right, who has a family, who I may be Black, but I may be a migrant, I have many, many more issues than someone who doesn't face those obstacles, or someone who is biased in a preferred position, right? So it is a very important thing, and particularly for young people whom TVET is really designed to accommodate, it can really be detrimental. And we have to be aware of it in order to deal with it. And many of our youth are not aware, as are many of our employers, you know, so that we need to really talk about it. Okay, we can move on. Right. right, so let's talk about some of those sources of bias in the TVET journey. And I'm trying to use a very simple model of that journey and apply different types of biases that may surface. Now, we spoke about TVET really being a program for persons coming out of secondary school, but guess what? The bias starts long before that, right? So, how do I get to secondary school? Well, I have to have some sort of pre-secondary education. I have to go to primary school. If I happen to be differently abled, if I happen to live in a rural area where it's difficult to access school, I may have to travel for a very long distance. It might cost a lot of money that I may not have. With respect to the differently abled, depending on what my challenge is, if I'm in a wheelchair, if I'm visually impaired, if I cannot hear properly, if I have cognitive disabilities, all of those put me at a disadvantage immediately. So depending on the system that I am engaging with, I may never succeed. If I have like we spoke about financial, if I have literacy issues, if I did not learn to read well enough in preschool, let's say, or at home with my parents, I will have challenges. If I'm a migrant and I cannot speak the language, because at this point in time, as far as I'm aware, we're not offering our education in any other language but English, and Trinidadian if you want to say that, then we have a problem if I'm a migrant or if I don't speak English. So immediately, I encounter things that could put me at a disadvantage. So we identify these disadvantaged groups and try to facilitate them. So that's the first challenge. Immediately, audito. So you could change the slide. Okay. Now things could be so bad that I have many of these challenges, or my particular bias or disadvantage is so bad that I simply fall out. I give up on trying. It's too uncomfortable for me. I may visit the school. I never make it past the door a second time. I'm being bullied in school or whatever. I face other acts of discrimination that make it difficult for me, and I just never bother to stay. So now I'm not educated and I'm not employed. And that's a whole level of different of different disadvantage there. And as I said, particularly if there are many of these things compounded. So now I enter secondary school, I manage to get through, I deal with whatever biases I face that I may not even be aware of, because there are implicit biases, and by the way, we all have them. The implicit ones in particular we may not be aware of. All right, we have been groomed in a particular way. Our culture teaches us certain things. These days, what we pick up on YouTube and on TV, all of these things affect us. And we learn to differentiate, right? It's basically a tool to help us differentiate tall and short, right? Whether I could fit through a particular space or not, it facilitates. It's useful to know how to differentiate, but sometimes we rely on it too heavily. When it becomes unconscious, it gets in our way. So I've managed to make it through secondary school, and now I am about to enter TVET. Now, why am I entering TVET? This is a particular bias that is a real problem, and it's a problem globally. There are few countries, maybe in Europe, I think the literature said, where TVET vocations, TVET training is accepted equally with academic, but certainly here in the Caribbean, here in Trinidad, if you don't go to a tertiary institution, if you don't do A levels, there are certain things that indicate academic success, and academic success is success. All right, it is a big part of success as we have learned it. Now, the data shows differently. The data shows that in many cases, this tertiary education may not put us in a different position to someone who has gone through TVET. There are many persons who have gone through the vocational routes and have done many very, very well. In fact, we could look at industry. Industry is supported by TVET vocations, technicians, numerous different types, and they do well, right? They are they are very much in demand, and they earn well. But of course, the level of earnings, the demand, and so on varies with the particular sector. So there are other sectors where the demand would not be as high, they may not earn as well. Nonetheless, the point is, even though technical, vocational, occupationals are just as necessary, in fact, I dare to say more necessary than academic education, many times, that's not how our culture has brought us up. And I could give you my own story. And I can use the word grooming. I was groomed from the age of 5 that I would be going to a particular school, secondary school, and well, it didn't go as far as what I would do beyond that, because my parents were pretty confident that once I went to a particular type of school, academic institution, that I would be on the path of academics, which would take me to somewhere successful. So I never entertained doing vocational skills. It just didn't occur to me. So I'm using my own story to show you how it works. And fortunately for me, I was able to manage. It was difficult in some situations. The thing about technical vocational skills, however, education, is that we position it as the place to go if you have not been successful at academics, which is not true. It is a real option for all, right? It's a very useful option. And well, it was a different time back then, but if I was older and I could have used my own judgment, and if I had the internet and could have researched things and so on, I might have picked up that actually it's an excellent place to go to start a business. It's an excellent route for development, and it doesn't prevent me from doing academics later on. It absolutely does not, right? So this is a big issue, because those who enter the vocational fields may very well have an issue of feeling less than, which creates other problems. Along with, let's not forget, if I'm differently abled already, I already live in a rural district and have certain hardships. I'm financially challenged. I have literacy issues, and I'm a migrant, right? So we see how it's already becoming complicated. All right. In terms of another source of bias, another thing that could kick us out, we have minimum educational requirements that, to be honest, many who enter the vocational stream may just barely meet. I have worked in the vocational stream, and sometimes there isn't a good fit as well. We don't ask the questions. I remember, I'll give another story. Someone who had worked in the system back when we had John D. and has transitioned into a newer system. And that person was saying that one of the things that they did was ensure that there was a really good fit for the person. Why are you doing this? Are you doing it because you really want to? Or are you doing this because someone is telling you to do it? It matters, because if the student doesn't have the ability, if they don't like it, well, apart from wasting resources, they will not stay. Or even if they complete, they are unlikely to stay in that particular vocation. And the data is showing that it benefits persons when they stay in the vocation, all right, better than if they switch around. So they may complete a particular thing, realize, I don't really like this, I'm not going to stay, and then have to, do something, make themselves agile and versatile to move into something else. All right, so this issue of this particular bias, this selection bias, is a big one for us in Trinidad and Tobago. All right, so let's assume that we have made a decision to go into a vocational program. When we are in the program now, we still have other situations that create biases that put us at additional disadvantages. All right, implicit biases in teachers. They're not aware half of the time. If we are aware, we could control it. If we are aware, it's definitely discrimination sometimes, depending on what it is. Sometimes we're not aware, right? And it impacts how we deliver, how we design programs, how we correct and mark papers. All of those things are impacted by how we design our programs. Now, here's the thing. Vocational programs contain two components, the hands-on, as we mentioned before, and the training. There's some technical training that you have to do to understand some principles. The manner in which the technical training in particular is delivered matters, because remember, these people are not academic. They're not as academically inclined, the majority. So vocational students, we need to be careful that we design programs that fit their abilities. Many years ago, I was told by a child psychologist that in Trinidad and Tobago, we have as high as a 25% per classroom distribution of special needs students. How many of our vocational programs consider this, have this concretely planned into the program? I don't know. But given that we know we are consciously using it for those who are not academically inclined, or less academically inclined, I should say, then we need to be conscious of the design of our programs, that they're not, the training element of it, that it is not highly academic, that it suits the persons that are. So that is another. So I'm in the TVET program, and I've seen it personally because I've been in the classroom, that those things challenge the students as well. They become frustrated, which means if I have to struggle too much here, I'm going to leave. I'm going to leave. Or if I'm coming, in some cases, I'm coming because I'm also financially challenged, and if I'm getting a stipend, it'll be useful. Right? So we really need to look at the program design. We need to look at the access to the program as well. I know institutions try to locate venues where persons have access, because the reality is if I'm also employed, I have to ask for time off. Or if I'm self-employed, I have to leave what I'm doing to come and do this program. I've offered programs free of charge that people couldn't take advantage of because it messed up their day and they couldn't earn. Right? The question of IT literacy is a problem as well, something to consider, and COVID showed this to us, because we assume, I think anyway, this is a bias that we have, that everyone has a phone. Not necessarily a fancy phone, but everyone has a phone. And we assume that because we are very competent in using this phone, that it means we are IT literate, and that is far from the case. I have seen situations where even academically educated tertiary level students have difficulty with IT literacy. And if we are relying on IT literacy in parts of our vocational programs, then we need to be very careful about how the program is designed. We need to ensure, if, for example, during COVID, persons we decided, okay, it's very quick, easy, we'll put a program online for persons, but guess what? They don't have a computer. Remember, we still have the financial challenge there. They didn't have a computer before. That means they're not used to using a computer. All right. So all the programs, all the fancy Moodles and the whatever is there is a challenge. So All of these things are biases that create disadvantage for persons. They're not intended to be good intentions, but they affect the success of programs, they affect the psyche of the students, they perpetuate this thing about academic is better, because most academic institutions are better equipped and they provide a little bit more access and training around certain competencies. Gender is an interesting one, particularly discrimination against women, bias. And I don't use a strong case of discrimination, but bias against women simply because of the role that women play in society. Women come like TVET, the ultimate TVET vocation, because they also have to consider the care of their children, the care of their parents sometimes, the care of their sisters, their siblings sometimes. So vocational students have a lot of responsibility, and I've seen all of these play out where they have issues of domestic violence, they have issues of gender-based violence in the workplace, they have all sorts of issues. So particularly with respect to gender-based violence, when it comes to gender-based bias, when it comes to women, it is a big one as well. It has been treated with, and it continues to be treated with, but I'm not certain that we put enough emphasis on it in our vocational programs. I have seen groups of students get along very well in classes. In terms of participation, women are there. That we have dealt with. I don't think we have as big a challenge with women entering STEM vocations as other places. In fact, Huma did a little bit of a survey, not official and definitely may be subject to some challenges, to understand what the issues around gender bias with women were. And we found that it's not an issue many women are employed. The challenge we now need to deal with is the experience of being employed as a woman. And I'll give you 2 short bites. When I was employed in industry, I was being put in charge of an operation, an offshore operation. I went out there and I had a great time. I really enjoyed it. And I think I did a good job. Years later, I was told that there was a program, a deliberate program to prepare the, at the time, and still is, predominantly male population for my appearance. They were prepared. So that is what made it very easy for me. A few years later, however, now remember I was in a senior position. Here the bias again. A few years later, someone at the technician level, a female, I would have to say volunteered herself to participate in working in that environment and was tortured. I don't know if the same active, deliberate preparation was done, but she had a different experience. And I always ask myself, is it because she was at a different level? So all sorts of subtle biases, unintentional, begin to come into play when it comes to employment generally, but particularly with respect to vocational, it is an issue because how equipped are we to deal with it? All right, and remember, I still have other issues that I'm carrying around, okay? So I've made it through the program and I'm now going to be selected. I've applied for a job and I'm going to be recruited, taken through the recruitment process by an employer. It's also possible I've decided to set up my own business and I'm going to employ myself. But let's take the case of the employer. who has a process in place, nice process, interviews, panel, everything. And we actually have laws that prevent certain questions being asked, but we still manage to slip in some bias in the way we review, perhaps, in the nature of the panel, perhaps. So it's bias in recruitment, and here we are as a Human Resource Management Association with all the HR managers saying that it is possible that in spite of all the laws, all the policies, everything, there is still bias in the HR processes. And if there's bias in the HR processes, in the execution of the HR processes, bet your bottom dollar there's bias in the execution of other processes as well within the organization. One of those is age. This, again, is relevant to our Mr. Daniel mentioned it earlier. But it seems to be becoming an issue globally now, where, and perhaps the pandemic has propelled this as well, and previous recessions, where we want to pay younger people less. Now that might be appropriate if the job calls for a particular skill and they have less experience or skill level than is required. That may be appropriate. But if they come in with the appropriate level of skill, then it's illegal. That's discrimination. All right. So our youth are faced with many challenges because have we trained them to be conscious? What protection do they have? How many people really report sexual harassment or that I'm being paid less than others? Right? So what data do we have on our own performance? Right? So the environment, again, from recruitment into the organization also has numerous traditional biases, things around race, ethnicity, place of origin, that kind of thing, as well as emergent biases like the ageism and other things that are coming up, like sexual orientation, right? And as I said, a lot of it is unintentional, implicit, unnamed, but bias nonetheless. And what that means to everyone is that we are underperforming. We are doing much less than we could. All right, so let's move on to the next slide. Right. And in fact, in looking at the literature, one of the points that was made is, in fact, many TVET programs themselves underperform. And I wouldn't doubt this because oftentimes you find yourself using attrition as a measure of your performance. Heavy focus on attrition and not number of graduates, how well people have graduated, placements, it says something. So the programs tend to underperform, and that's supported by ILO research as well. Right, so you could go on to the next slide. And we mentioned unique events that present other challenges that further complicate issues. So during COVID, some vocations would have been considered essential, others were not. So hairdressers, business administrators, a whole heap of persons were not considered essential. And they had to figure out how to survive. The majority, of course, would have had to take advantage of the special social programs that were developed at the point in time. Some with good entrepreneurial skills were able to pivot very quickly and do something differently. Maybe they were a bit ahead in terms of already preparing, for example, to go online or take advantage of the digital age. But COVID would have left some perhaps a large portion of the technical vocational occupations at home for an extended period. And others would have been okay, you know, mostly industry, manufacturing, the industries that are heavily supported by academics as well. So even things like COVID, even odd events seem to compound the situation of persons who typically go into vocational training and vocational areas. Now, that would make it sound really challenging, but the truth is, as we said, vocational skills are essential. They're necessary. They're good business. And for that reason, could you go to the next slide, please? Okay. We'll hold on that for now, Nari. Let's go to the other slide. We'll play, I really wanted to play this video about gender bias and understand it. It's a really good video. If we have time at the end, I will play it. But I'll prefer, as we're flowing, to move on into what we really came to talk about here, which is eliminating bias. And I will have NTA send the participants the link to that video if we are unable to get through it today. All right. So what's already in place? Of course, things have been done to eliminate bias and manage bias to a certain extent. We have laws. Sexual harassment, minimum wage. We have all sorts of legislation, HIV, around HIV, for example. You know, there are things that have been done to protect persons. We have the Equal Opportunity Commission. We have internal policies, right? Employers have policies that they're required to have by law to demonstrate and to ensure that they're not discriminating. Some have voluntary policies to ensure that the processes that they have in place are actually working. All right. So in the case of employers, it's a legal requirement, their legal guidance. In the case of providers, institutions of providing TVET education, it's not as clear. So you kind of have to modify the guidance to suit your institution, but you're required to have policies as well, right? And of course, we have many social programs to address discrimination. Let's move on. Nari? Right, but there's so many elements of bias. We can't address all of them today, unfortunately, right? But there's lots of documentation that we could refer to. The ILO is fantastic. This is their business. All right. So there's lots of, one in particular, equality. Oh, I had the it's on one of the slides. Let me just get that reference for you. It's an excellent document. Equality at Work, the continuing challenge, right? That and numerous others could give all the details on all these various types of challenges, and there's numerous literature, right? I just wanted to deal with those highlighted, the TVET, the vocational academic bias, because that's unique to this particular realm. Gender, the environment in the workplace, and the emerging biases, right? I think we will have time for that. Okay, go ahead, Nari. Right, so very quickly, as I said, you could move on. I mentioned that already, move on. Right, here is an approach. It's not the only one, but an approach to dealing with this TVET academic bias. And of course, the ILO has made its own recommendations as well. One of the things that the literature talks about, when I mentioned FIT earlier, asking the question, what is your motive for doing this program? It is because it has been shown that choice makes a difference. A student entering vocational studies by choice and selecting their vocational program by choice makes a difference to their success. Of course, they are more likely to be committed, less likely to leave that program. So the career guidance that is currently being offered, I don't know the details of it, and of course it will vary from institution to institution. But it must update students on what is in demand, how the what our employers are looking for, what the future looks like. But it must also allow them to make a good choice, give them the tools to make choice. So it's career guidance and career coaching. Coaching is around making a choice, right? We need to change mindsets. The trouble is, look at how many mindsets that have been so well established for such a long time. We are talking about the entire nation, the entire Caribbean. Well, we wouldn't undertake the Caribbean, but we're talking about changing the mindset of a nation around appreciating vocational skills for the value they bring, as opposed to seeing it as runner-up. Seeing it, changing the mindset to appreciate it as a valuable pathway to success, as opposed to runner-up, right? We need to carefully prepare students to cope with bias as well, because the literature is also showing that we need to be careful, because sometimes when you alert people to bias, now they start to pay attention. Okay, that's what's going on here. And it could actually be detrimental if not well done, right? Now, in terms of this mammoth problem of changing the attitude toward vocational, removing the bias, here are a few suggestions. The suggestion is the academic programs can add vocational elements, add more. There are some academic institutions and secondary schools that already have a component of vocational. Add more so that it is seen as, hey, even if I enter the academic stream, I understand that this is a really valuable, and by the way, I am seeing young people taking that approach now, right? So it is seen as equal in status to the academics, right? That brings the professions, the vocations up to par. Entrepreneurship. There's been a lot of work on entrepreneurship over the last few years. That's fantastic. However, let us ensure that it is not an option, but everyone goes through the entrepreneurship program, so that even if I fall out through the filters leading up to employment, when I attempt to be self-employed, I'm really equipped, and I can select, I can identify a good market. I know how to pivot, I know how to set up systems and make the best of my opportunity around entrepreneurship. Add entrepreneurship to the academic spectrum as well. Doctors, for example, learn to run their businesses along the way. But most doctors are trained to be independent business owners. Lawyers likewise. So we should be training the academics in entrepreneurship as well. And so increase it. And I just want to add here another little tidbit. So I went through the academic stream. I don't regret it. It didn't hurt me. It worked well for me. And I just wanted to draw reference to a few people that I know. In the street that I live on, there are 7 houses. 7, right? 7. There isn't a house that the hobby at a very high level of skill isn't vocational. We have 2 carpenters, we have a seamstress, we have a cake maker, all highly qualified people who went through the academic stream. So I asked myself, if we were not groomed, now it didn't hurt anybody, yeah? But if we were not groomed, would we have been in these professions? Would we have been in vocational professions, perhaps doing even better, running bigger businesses within other industries, right? Let's just change the slide. I see we're close to our time. There's a little model that we had done around COVID for HERMAT that might have some features that will be useful in taking on this mammoth thing. One thing for sure we don't want to do is assume that all sectors are going to behave the same way. We need to dice it up. We need to understand what's the priority issues around each, which are the biases playing in each, so that we could actually address it in a meaningful way and develop programs around it. Nari, you can move on. Right? In terms of the emergent biases, I'm suggesting we need each one to address it like we addressed HIV as a project, as a major project. You have a structured program, you have policies, everything to deal with that specific bias. And we move along that way. Nari, next one. And of course, institutions and employers, I'm suggesting that even though NTA is enforcing and insisting that you have a certain amount of quality assurance, that you upgrade your programs to consider the biases that could be minimizing the impact that you're having, and remove that scorecard of underperforming for many institutions the next time the ILO passes around and does its own survey. So performance, if we take a performance perspective and we understand for this organization, this is what I need going forward. Here are the skills that I need. Here are the vocational skills that I need. These are the skills that I need. I don't need a particular ethnicity, a particular height, or a particular size. I need a skill. If we look at it from that perspective, a lot of bias could be eliminated, right? But there are proven methods for training and alleviating bias. Nari? And of course, you have to bear gender in mind. It plays into everything. And last but not least, as a matter of fact, it should be first, our data. We know in the Caribbean, our data is limited. And I know the NTA does labor studies in conjunction with others. I am not sure at what frequency, but what we do know is that things are changing faster and faster. So whatever we're doing, we need to step it up faster, and we need to be sure that we don't introduce bias in our use of data, because there's statistical bias as well. So that kind of brings me to the close on, Nari, just move one more slide down. Right, go back to the previous slide. I just want to point to one in terms of making use of data and statistics and scorecards and so on. The ILO guide on making TVET skills inclusive for all is an excellent document to work with as a starter. Yes, Nari, you could move ahead. And just to say that HERMAT is more than willing to help. We do have some competency in terms of managing diversity and inclusion, in terms of doing training, in terms of helping support your program. So don't be afraid to call us and ask for help. And I'll close on that. And we'll send you the link for the video. All right, so Mr. Daniel, it's over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Jackman, for that informative presentation. And we want to go right into the question and answer segment. There's one that is posted immediately up for us, and it says, will IT literacy be part of the TVET programs in the paradigm that we are in now, where most programs are online? What are your thoughts on that, please?
Well, my thoughts are it should be, it must be. But, IT literacy by itself is one thing. We still have to figure out how we're going to give people access. Because remember, some of us still have financial issues. We have issues with respect to access to power. Some people may not have power. Some people may be in a space where even if I had a computer, oh gosh, it's so difficult for me to focus. And, so there are other things that go along as well. But definitely we need to do IT literacy. We're in the digital age and it's not going to go away. Remote work is the way of, even in the NTA programs, we need to consider how we're going to do remote training in a different way, because IT may not be it. Computer may not be it, or yes, using computers, but it might be more video, more than the online learning in an academic kind of way. We may have to use more, because YouTube is very good at teaching you how to do things. So why not incorporate that into the program as well?
Right. For a company, what are those incentives that you feel should make a company revisit its policies, its procedures, as it pertains to eliminating biases?
Well, if I am running, I always say companies don't hire persons for the fun of it. They don't. They don't hire them to frustrate them. They hire them because they want to make use of their skills. So why put obstacles in the way? So if you can remove bias, which is an obstacle, you are freeing that employee to be their best self. I no longer have to worry about the fact that I don't have access to something, or I'm considered less than because I'm vocational, or I don't have these other worries. I'm free to deliver what I have to deliver. I don't have to deal with a boss who has his implicit biases and who might be making life difficult for me. So it is definitely worth every company's any penny that they spend on it, because you can do things. There's software, there's affirmative action. You can set targets. You can do things to ensure that you remove certain types of bias, and it'll pay in the end in the performance that you achieve. You will see efficiencies improve. You will see delivery improve. You will see happier employees. You'll see a more sustainable business.
We have time probably for one more question, and I want to look at if you can draw the link for us between access for all individuals, widening the pool, and how that can increase the innovation and competitiveness of the firm.
Oh, of course. Well, the thing about it is that our, let's start with the first set of that first group that fell off the journey because they were either differently abled, had financial constraints, didn't have access, or whatever. They have intelligence, they have ideas, they have creativity, they have something to offer. And if we can find a way to bring them in, maybe they can't use their hands, maybe they can't see, but maybe they have some creative capability that we can introduce, because we know innovation is not necessarily massive. Innovation and transformation is two different things, but they might be transformative as well. We need brain power as well as physical power. So even if they're not in a position to contribute, for whatever reason they fell off the filters, they may be very useful in bringing that innovation in. We talk about innovation. Let us harness whatever skills they have. Help us think, ask questions. We know questions help innovation, right? And if we can get, even without that, if we can get more people into the vocational skills, we know we're heading in the right direction, because the digital age, Industry 4.0, everything is heading in the direction where we need more vocational skills of a different type. It's easier to train. I mean, one of the points is that of vocational skills is that you can get someone into the workforce very quickly. With academics, you have to go through a much heavier and longer program, but you can get people in much more quickly, so that whatever innovations you have access to the right skills now to translate that into something meaningful.
But looking at organization and organizational policies, there seems to be a difference in terms of the treatment of your technical versus your support and what we perceive as the professional level staff. For instance, and one of our participants is asking, what's your take on the support, let's say an HR person having access to parking versus a technical person who would not have that access? Is this a subtle form of bias?
It could be how the job is valued, because even though I'm not in a position to see, right, in the organizations that I work for, parking is for everyone, you know. But it could be some subtle form of benefit that is being afforded to a job that is valued more, because there actually are ways of valuing a job in an organization. For me, parking is not a meaningful thing, but I really can't say because I don't know the organization and I don't know how they came to that conclusion. But I would think that everyone needs to park. It's not against the law, however.
I hear you. We are looking at eliminating biases, and in terms of for an organization, one of the critical things that they want from staff is engagement. And
Yes.
if someone feels excluded or feels less of a value in terms of their own input and their position, how do you see that impacting on retention and this whole issue of employee engagement and performance?
Well, if you don't feel valued, it's difficult to motivate yourself to do your best. You'll do your job, but more than likely you'll make a minimal effort, whatever you perceive to be the value that you're being compensated for in your treatment as well. So the reality is that it will affect performance, it will affect engagement. And ultimately it will affect the company, because then the manager will have issues to deal with that he may have created unknowingly.
Well, Ms. Jackman, colleagues and friends in the participating audience, we have come to the end of this TVET session. We want to thank you again for your interest and participation. And we do hope that in some way it would have added value to your time that you have spent with us. And you are a little bit clearer on the issues of biases and eliminating biases and how it can resound positively to the organization. So, Ms. Jackman, we want to thank you for that informative and very detailed presentation.
Thank you very much.